Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on hunting and wildlife trade this Friday morning. My name is Dr. Vikram Aditya. I work as a principal scientist at the Center for Wildlife Studies. The Center for Wildlife Studies is an internationally recognized center for excellence in the arenas of wildlife research, conservation, and education. My research focuses on hunting and wildlife trade, as well as landscape change and its impacts on mammal communities, particularly in central India and the Eastern Ghats landscape. The Center for Wildlife Studies has been doing a series of webinars related to wildlife and conservation since the pandemic year in 2020. And we have covered a large range of topics such as human-wildlife conflict, environmental education, art for conservation, disease, leopards, tigers, snakes, otters, and a range of other species. You can watch all our previous webinars on the CWS YouTube channel. If you want to reach out to us, if you want to talk to us, if you would like to collaborate with us, or if you would like to donate to our work on biodiversity and conservation, please feel free to contact us at outreach@cwsindia.org. The email will be available to you in the chat box. So I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar on hunting and wildlife trade, particularly in the Indian and Asian context. I'd like to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Dr. Rajkamal Goswami. Dr. Rajkamal Goswami is a close friend and a colleague of mine. Dr. Goswami works as a fellow in residence at the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, Bangalore, Karnataka. Dr. Goswami is a trained conservation scientist. His research is largely embedded within an interdisciplinary framework and is focused on explaining changes in forests and biodiversity over space and time through the lens of resource governance, state policies, and socioeconomic drivers. Currently, Dr. Goswami is working towards designing methodological tools to measure the efficacy of conservation practices such as restoration and wildlife protection in India. He has over 15 years of field research experience from the Eastern Himalayas and Northeastern Hills, and he has also created impacts on the ground by leading to the protection of several community forests in the state of Meghalaya in Northeast India within a state and community partnership model. In the near future, Dr. Goswami hopes to create an impact by making significant contributions to the best practices discourse on conservation-driven livelihoods and sustainability practices at a national level. So I'd like to explain the protocol that we will be following for this webinar today. Dr. Goswami will speak for about 15 to 20 minutes on the topic of hunting and wildlife trade in the Indian context. And then both of us will have a discussion on a series of topics related to this subject, following which we will open the floor for the audience questions. I'd like to request the audience, if you have any questions, please type your questions in the chat box and we will take these questions one by one. Dr. Rajkamal, are you ready?
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot, Vikram, for that very warm and very generous introduction, if I can say that. So I recently joined ATREE as a faculty, and I'm trying to still create some of the research priorities for the small group that I'm working with. And although after my PhD, where I really looked at hunting very, very deeply in the northeastern part of it, took a backseat for a while because I got interested in few other questions in which basically looking into how animals and forests change across different management regimes. And what we found when we started working towards that topic was that hunting was the main driver of the changes in the abundance and the population that we see across Northeast. So the question that we were interested in asking was, how do hunting get regulated, controlled over different kind of management regimes, different forest types? So in this case, we were looking primarily at two types. One was state controlled forest, which was reserve forest, and the other one was the community controlled forest. And so most of my talk will come from that study today. And then, of course, I'm also currently working with some student who is looking at hunting in the peninsula in India. So it's slightly new, exciting for me. And like Vikram told, I'm also interested in creating certain viable solutions. We have been working on these issues for a long time. We researchers like to collect data, like to understand things in a much deeper way. But at some point in time, we are all in this field because we also want to make some change in the ground. So during the talk also, that's where I will head towards. I'll just share some of the experiences of working on different issues of hunting, primarily in the northeastern part of India. But I would also like to end my talk with some of the questions that we are grappling with the student that I'm working, primarily to see how we can create certain long-term solutions to address this very serious issue, as we all know. So I'll just share my screen. Give me 1 second. So first, let's start with a very fundamental question: that what is hunting, and why are we focusing on hunting today? And is it the most important issue or the most grave threat for the wildlife? So we are hosting this, or we are having this event in the occasion of World Wildlife Day, and the idea is to create conservation awareness about wildlife. But is it the only threat that wildlife faces today? And for that, you have to get some perspective. So what is hunting? Hunting. When we use the term hunting in the context of conservation discourse, we are primarily referring to terrestrial animals. We are not really considering aquatic animals. The second thing is, hunting will mostly bring to your mind images of mammals being hunted. But if you look at the whole ecosystem, the terrestrial ecosystem, and the different kind of animals that inhabit the different terrestrial ecosystem, you know that it ranges from very small insects to very large mammals. And so when we talk about hunting, we are not really talking about insects. Most often, we are not even considering snakes or amphibians, but mostly we talk about large birds, and we also talk about mostly large mammals. Yeah. So is it then true? Can we ask the question that hunting only threatens mammals and birds, or certain large birds, or only taxa? The answer is no. People eat all one whole group working on snakes, amphibians, fishes, and stuff actually fishes. This why was hunting of this few group of people, because they are also very, very culturally significant for most of the world. They connect to us at an emotional level. The images of, say, if you see the image of an insect being killed and compare it with the image of an elephant being killed, it will have very different impacts on you. And our response, our research priorities are driven by these emotion-based responses. So you have to be very, very aware that whatever we are going to talk today, one of the primary reasons is because we are concerned about this taxa. And a large part of that concern comes from our emotional attachment, our values, and the way we look at different animals with a different. So in nature, if you or each taxa, there is an assumption that all the living beings are equal. But when we look from the lens of us, the human lens, all species are not equal. Even if you look at Schedule 1 list, which was recently published, the latest one, you will see that all animals or all species found in India are not featuring in Schedule 1. There are these hierarchies. And these are the hierarchies that drive our interest, drive our research focus. But I would also like to point out that that's not the only reason why we focus on large mammals. There is a very scientific reason behind it also. And over the course of the discussion and a short series of images, mostly that I'm going to share with you, we will try to demystify this whole thing, that why we are so concerned about the certain groups of animals that we are going to talk about today. And as you can see in this image, these are so on the right image, you can see one very small bird. Some of you can try to guess what bird it is. It's clearly a very, very, very small bird. So it's nothing but it's called the tailor bird. And you know how small a tailor bird is. And you can imagine that no one will hunt a tailor bird for food. But when you go to Northeast or any part of the country, I mean, it's not just that hunting happens in Northeast, but the prevalence of hunting or it's much easier to see hunting in practice in Northeast than other parts of the country. And there are various reasons for it. We can discuss about that later. So you can see, like at point a hunter goes out just with a catapult and he can end up killing. So this is from one hunter's bag basically. And all the birds didn't fit in the frame, but there were more than 25 individuals of these are black bulbul, common bird in North. But there are also people who hunt this large bird. So I'm sure most of you know what this species is. This is the female of a rufous-necked hornbill. It is a relatively rare bird in the Northeast. It's found in, you can see it in very few locations in the country. It's restricted mostly in the Northeastern and Eastern Himalayas. And it's a beautiful bird. I've seen many of them in the wild. I've seen them nesting. So when one of my friends in that landscape shared this image, and even though it's not ethically correct to show the faces, that's why I'm not showing the faces, but one of them is my friend actually. And they had gone for a picnic and they saw this bird. And usually when they go for picnic, they'll also carry guns and different kind of implements to hunt, because that's part of the fun of a picnic there. And they just gunned down this bird, and very proudly they shared an image on WhatsApp saying that, oh, we got this bird. And that's primarily because I had created a network in the landscape where I was looking at the hunting practices. So this is from Jaintia Hills in Meghalaya. So we are going to publish a paper soon. So till then, there were no records of rufous-necked hornbill from Meghalaya, at least in the recent times and all. And we saw many birds. It's one of the, I would say, the third most common hornbill that you see in the landscape. But nevertheless, in the larger picture, it's a very rare bird. And this kind of image is really, really very shocking to see, but these are also happening. But what we are going to mostly focus on today is this mammal of, the hunting of different kind of mammals. And why mammals? Is because they are large-bodied in terms of their ecology and biology. They are relatively, they have low fecundity rate. They can't reproduce at high rates, so that their stock in nature replenishes fast enough to meet the kind of offtake or the amount of hunting that is going on in the landscape. So when we talk about sustainability, so if you are following the big forums and policies where people are talking about sustainable consumption of wildlife, say in the IPBES forum or even in the World Biodiversity Forum, people are talking about sustainable offtake. No one is telling that you shouldn't hunt. What people are trying to say is you should hunt in a sustainable way. And when you bring in this question of sustainability, it is very, very important for us to understand these sustainable limits and the big deal which defines or or which should define the amount of hunting that we can do should come from very basic fundamental population ecology, where you should know the age structure of the community that you are going to in that area of the hunted animals community that you are going to focus on. You should look at their fecundity, the reproductive rate, and should also look at the population size and all. And based on all these parameters, you can design models to predict how many individuals hunted in a particular season. And generally, large-bodied animals are more threatened due to hunting than small-bodied animals. And because there are two reasons. One is, like I told, they have low reproductive rates and slower reproductive rates. And second is, human prefers to eat or hunt large animals because they also get a lot of meat. So if I have to feed myself and my friends, I might have to hunt. If I'm just going to hunt birds, I might have to hunt about 50, 60, say medium or small sized birds. But if I can hunt one deer or one wild pig, as you can see in the image, I can not only feed my friends, I can distribute in the village, and I can eat that meat for at least the next 1 or 2 weeks. So you can get about 50 kilo of meat from one full grown wild pig, and about 10 to 15 kilo of meat from a barking deer. And if you hunt a sambar, you can eat for almost a month. Yeah, so like I told, hunting is not just prevalent in the Northeast. You can see these images from Maharashtra. But often when you see these images, they are usually caught by the forest department, and that's when these images surfaces in the media. And it's also quite common for us to see sale of wildlife, either for pet or for meat. Again, you can see one hornbill species here. So species like parakeets, and I'll show you more. They are often preferred as pets, not just for local people to keep at home, but it's also part of the international trade market. And wild meat, like this is wild pig meat, it's widely sold in the market in the Northeast. It's not easy to reach this market. These are from very remote markets in the Northeast. But this image was taken from a roadside stall just on the main highway. This was in Nagaland about 10 years back. I'm not sure if you can still see such scenes along the highway because of the, a lot of things which has happened over the last 10 years. And that is also one of the things that we would like to touch upon when we come to the end of this presentation. So this is something to be hard, and he has been working on it for a long time, and in the other parts of country. But this is a Chinese thing, and this is when I got this image again, sent by one friend from the landscape where I was working in. Sorry. So in that particular instance, also you can see that they ended up killing not just the adult pangolin, but also the baby pangolin. And this just really pushes you to do something about it. Because like I told, it's not just pangolin needs to be protected. These kind of images also makes us very, very emotional. And as living and thinking species, our empathy is what drives most of the action that we see against hunting and the sense of ethics also. So if there is a choice that you have that you'll just kill the adult and not the kid, you will make that choice. And there are certain people who makes a choice, no, we will kill both because both of them will have skill, and I'll end up getting say about 50 grams or 100 grams more skill. And you know the scales of pangolins are very, very expensive. It fetches a lot of price in the market. So often such choices are determined by just the value. So they see these animals just as you see when you go to the market and buy one pair of jeans or two pair of jeans. something like that. So for them, this is something that if they get, it's a product for them, and by trading in that product, they stand to make money. And here also, if you see a lot of green pigeons being just sold like vegetables. This was also from the same stall in the highway along Nagaland. So what happens is when we see such images of hunting, or when we understand hunting in the landscape, we end up assuming that all the animals are being hunted out and there are no animals surviving. But what we found in our study was that a lot of animals survived, not in the numbers that we expected or predicted, but one clear thing was that most of the animals that we saw or we captured through our camera traps were mostly small and medium-sized animals. So, for example, the only large cat, like quote unquote large cat that we got from the landscape, clouded leopard, and that was also the most like the rarest cat that we got. But other cats like leopard cat and marble cat were quite abundant in that landscape. We also saw the golden cat. And Vikram, I believe, when he came to that landscape, when I was working there, he had seen one leopard cat right when he was walking in the forest. Sorry, one golden cat.
Marble.
Golden cat.
Golden cat, correct.
Yeah. And then we are Northeast is very, very rich in small mammals. Most of them, and some of them are quite abundant also. So if you look at the abundance data that we have based on our camera trap work, the large civet and common palm civet were among the most abundant mammals. Why they were abundant, maybe one of the slides will make it clearer. Yeah. So this is I'm not sure if many of you recognize this species, but it's called the striped-backed weasel, and this is one of the first records, like photographic records of this species from the Northeast. So as you saw, the landscape is very rich in the mammal diversity, even after sustained hunting over long periods of time. But we also see a shift in the community that we see there, the animal community. And the kind of study that we wanted to do, we really so if you read some of the old papers on hunting, particularly done in South America, you have very distinct categories that these are not hunted sites, or these are hunted sites, or these are. But when I went in the landscape, I also thought I'll get such sites where some people are hunting, and there are sites when there is no hunting taking place. And that's why I thought maybe in forest hunting, where is it coming? I went in the landscape and I started speaking to people, so it was not categories where one hunting on, but what we found was that intensities of hunting, and these intensities of hunting are driven by the distance of these and also compliance law. So when people are usually not really keen to go and hunt unless they have to hunt, but it doesn't mean they don't hunt their stock. And it's very actually distributed in all part. Have a lot of hunting, relatively lesser hunting. So we found this so very. I think you see the high yellow represents the medium intensities, and the green represents hunting, which happens at relatively low intensity. And across these sites, we wanted to see what were people hunting. So in our questionnaire, what we mainly focused on was to ask them that what was their most preferred species, which is represented by this relative preference index, the light gray colored in the graph. And we also asked them how many species that they hunted over the last 3 months. And and that data was plotted as relative harvest index across the 14 species that they claim to have hunted over the last 6 months. So what we found clearly was that there was some kind of a disparity in the way people prefer to hunt, like what species they really wanted to hunt when they used to go to the forest, and the species that they were really hunting, means they were actually getting when they were going into the forest. And if you look at the literature, what relative harvest index is an indicator of is in some sense close to the relative abundance of the animals in that landscape. Whereas relative preference index is something which indicates what people really want to hunt when they want to go to the forest. And what happens is these preferences are built over certain periods of time because of the prices that they fetch in the market, or because of the taste of the meat that they like, or because of certain cultural and very specific local reasons. And what happens over time when you start targeting certain species, those species in that particular landscape becomes very rare. So these can be applied in a very local context. You can't really have this kind of analysis at a very large scale. So what was clear was that in that particular landscape, you can see the Chinese pangolin had very high preference index, and that's primarily because of the high value that it was fetching in the market at that point in time when we were doing these interviews. But by that time, it was also clear that they were not getting Chinese pangolins when they were going to hunt, even though they were actively seeking that species. So what preference index also gives an indication of is the history of hunting in that landscape. So what is clear is that there used to be a lot of hunting pressure on these species, which were highly preferred by people. And due to this pressure, these species have become rarer in that particular landscape. And now I come to the second part of the discussion after telling you about how hunting takes place primarily in the northeastern part of India. But I'm really interested now is to understand what are the different kind of solutions that we can offer to tackle this very, very important. And so this graph was taken from this wild meat portal that has been developed by scientists primarily from UK, and it is funded by a host of organizations. It's hosted in the C4 website, and using a sample size of about 257 studies, they have plotted the different interventions that people are doing across projects to control hunting. So if you see this graph, also there are overlaps. It doesn't mean that one project is just focusing on one particular intervention. So, sorry, what happened there? So I'm not sure about why these lines came, but anyways, just ignore that. So what is clear is that most of the projects focus on creating alternative livelihood, followed by trying to raise awareness. And then the third very important intervention is considered to be law enforcement. And then in countries where people want to manage hunting or doesn't want to completely stop hunting, you can see that there are about 60 studies which are focusing on managing the hunting rather than stopping them. And they are also trying to work with the market to see how they can reduce the demand of certain species. Say, for example, the pangolin. So, if you start looking at these kind of interventions, so this doesn't mean that these have worked. So this 149 is just an indicator of the number of projects that is focused on implementing alternative livelihood as a way to tackle hunting. But it doesn't mean that in 149 cases, alternative livelihood has led to the decrease or in the stopping of the hunting activity. Just keep that in mind. So the point is that if more people believe that these are some of the more effective interventions that we should do, we are just assuming that in most of the cases that it works. And why we are just at the point where we just assume that this works, because in most of the studies, there are monitoring and evaluation come of whether this works or not. So they don't take baseline data. In most cases, they don't do a good evaluation of the implementation of these programs. And in the last case, they don't really evaluate the impact of that particular intervention. And we can understand why most studies don't have an M&E attached. M&E means monitoring and evaluation protocol. It's primarily because most of these projects are also funded for short time, and they are happening at a very small scale. So, and such changes are also not very. You can't observe the changes in a very short period of time. So if your project duration is 1 or 2 years, at the end of 2 years, you can't really say with a lot of confidence that these are the changes that are seen, because many of these sensitive issues, very tricky issues like hunting, takes decades and decades to make any changes on the ground. You need very, very long-term engagement with the local people. You need engagement with the law enforcement agencies. And only then you can expect to see some changes on the ground. But these has to be, so there has to be long-term programs, at least in few pilot sites, which can look at the effectiveness of this program. So keeping all these things in mind, based on the experience of working on hunting issues, having read most of the hunting papers, and now because like this thought has been triggered by the student that I'm working with right now. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to create a framework where we are trying to look at two broad, I would say, in the context of hunting, these are the two broad issues that we have to understand. So if you look at the top of the graph, these issues are something which drive hunting. And what we have done is we have categorized these drivers of hunting into two broader categories. One is the enablers and one are the pushers. So what do we mean by enabler of hunting? Enablers are those kind of, I would say, skill set or certain circumstances which enables people to hunt. And then there are certain issues like push. Push is very different from like what we are trying to categorize as enablers. Push is something which forces you to hunt, where you don't have much choice. Whereas enablers only creates that opportunity for you to hunt, but still you might have a choice where you either hunt or not. So for example, do I have the knowledge or the skill set to hunt? So without knowledge and skill set, I won't be able to hunt. So that is something that a person should have to be able to hunt. The second most important enablers are the availability of prey and the tools to hunt. So if you have a landscape or if you are living somewhere where there are these animals which you would like to eat or hunt, that is what we mean by availability of prey to hunt. And then there are these things like tools. You need tools to hunt. You need traps, you need guns, or you need bow and arrow, those kind of things. So whether you have the tools and the implements to do hunting. So this is what we mean by enablers. There might be more. We are just still building this model and framework. So, but I just wanted to share because that is something exciting and maybe it can generate some discussion also. And then when we come to pushes, like I told, pushes in this case, we don't have much choices. So poverty is one very, very important push. And then there are certain cultural preferences. So for example, it's very easy for us to sit here and judge that a person shouldn't hunt, say, a deer or a monkey to eat just because they are wild animals and they are there. But if you are in the shoe of that particular person, for him it's very, very important culturally. So if you go to Arunachal, there are these big festivals, annual festivals, where one of the important activity of that festival is to go and hunt animals. And there are festivals like this across the country also. So it's very easy for us to sit and judge, oh, why they are hunting animals and all. but it's a cultural practice for them. You have to understand that they have evolved with that landscape. They are indigenous to that place, and they know that landscape very well. And in some sense, they also had some idea to control hunting also. But if you go and tell them stop, you have also to keep in mind that if someone comes and tells you to stop your cultural activity. So, for example, in Assam, we like to eat laddus made out of coconut and rice during Bihu. And if some activist who feels that coconut leads to a lot of cholesterol, it's creating a lot of health problems, and rice is also creating a lot of problems in terms of increasing the incidences of diabetes in our country, and they just ban this kind of food, then you can imagine the kind of social turmoil that will be unleashed. So you can't really affect any ban, and there are certain pushes that where people don't really have much choices. So that is what we mean when we say pushes. So poverty is one of them. Preferences are one of them. Cultural preferences. There might be more pushes. Like I told, it's a framework that we are still trying to build. So any suggestions or any kind of ideas are more than welcome. You are free to share. And then in the second, what is in this part below or the below half of the graph, these are called as barriers. So barriers are something which is opposite to enablers and pushes, which tries to control hunting, or due to these factors, they act as either voluntary or involuntary, pushes against hunting. So, for example, one of the big barriers are ethical. So you can classify a lot of ethical barriers, like vegetarian people inherently they don't like to hunt. There might be legal barriers like the Wildlife Protection Act in India and many other kinds of legal parameters that exist. And there are cases of enforcement also. So the idea behind creating this framework is to clearly articulate this fact that in order to control hunting, you have to focus on this or this, if you think about it, which is easier to tackle. So we have to, we can't really work much with this. We can't really tackle this big problem of poverty, which exists and which many governments have tried to tackle in case of India over the last 75 years, I would say. So these are big problems. It's not our cup of tea. The cup of tea for conservation is to tackle such issues. We also can't touch the issue of cultural preferences, like I gave an example. So what are the two things that we should really target are this set of enablers. So how can we create certain barriers which doesn't enable them to hunt? So for example, one of the things which is being widely implemented in Arunachal today is to ask people to walk. And in areas near protected forests, they are also forced to surrender their guns. So then if you don't have a gun, automatically your hunting goes in a backseat, right? And this can be easily implemented, particularly if there is a strong law enforcement agency. And then if you also work with people and try to change their knowledge systems. Knowledge system in the sense is, again, this is like not something that a conservation scientist can alone do, but there are a lot of other parallel socioeconomic changes which are going on, which are forcing people to migrate from areas, rural areas around forests to cities. And so such, if you work with education, for example, if you give access to modern education, if you give access to modern medicine, so these knowledge systems and other enablers can also be easily tackled rather than trying to work with these very big problems. And of course, we know the impact of effective legal mechanisms, effective law enforcement that can help us to tackle hunting. So with this, I would like to stop and now we can open up for the conversation And also, if there are any questions and all, I think in the due course of time, there'll be opportunity to interact also. Thank you so much, Vikram, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Rajkamal. That was a very, very interesting presentation, and I really enjoyed it. I know about your work in the past, but it was really, interesting to see it after quite some time. So I was interested in this, in the aspect that you were covering last. What are the motivating factors of hunting? What motivates people to hunt? And then you divided those into very, very, very interesting categories, and I would say very sensible categories as well. What are the enablers? What are the pushers? So I was interested in this because I wanted to get a sense from you of what do you think is the proportion of is the proportion that culture plays in this versus socioeconomic factors, because I have seen that across parts of the Eastern Ghats and across parts of Central India and parts of probably other parts of South India as well, culture plays a very important part in motivating people to hunt, much more so than socioeconomic factor. I would say socioeconomic drivers of hunting is almost negligible, but cultural factors are the uh, much larger driver of hunting. Hunting is a very strong part of the culture of the people of the Eastern Ghats and Central India, and there are, like you said, there are festivals in the Eastern Ghats also. Usually they happen once a year only, but at other times also they happen. Sankranti, January, but it's mostly May and June. During the start of the planting season is when, for a week or so, is a large festival. It's called Bhumi Pandaga in Telugu. In Hindi, it's called Shikar Utsav, and in different tribal languages have their own names to this. So in Eastern Ghats and Central India, I would say the culture plays a very important part. Probably it's a much bigger driver than socioeconomic factors. So is it the same in the Northeast? Does culture play a much cultural role? Does it play a much stronger factor than socioeconomic factors?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, Vikram. You are very, very right. It's like a combo. So when you say socioeconomic, it's probably more useful to unpack these terms. Like, so when you mix social with the economic, no, culture becomes part of the social part. So there might be economic drivers of hunting. There are definitely economic drivers of hunting, and there are also the social, cultural drivers of hunting. Economic drivers of hunting are often assumed to be driven by poverty, but in many cases it's not. It's also aspirational. It's also a way to escape poverty, like the poverty trap. No, so for example, for a person who can hunt a rhino, for example, in Kaziranga, he can get enough money to live off comfortably for at least 3-4 years, like that. So it becomes also aspirational, that he might have seen some of his friends doing very well after they got into coaching, and then now they want to do that. It's not because they don't have food to eat, but that's primarily because they have seen someone prosper through this enterprise. And why I use the term enterprise is because if you look at the community level hunting in many parts of the northeastern region, it's actually practiced as an enterprise. So there are people who are professional hunters in that particular village. And if there are any festivals, the economically better off classes outsource hunting to the professional hunters. And they will have a group. They work in a group. It's not like the hunter goes alone to hunt. They work in groups. They work in close context with other part of their community within a very close circle, of course. And like you correctly pointed out, most of the time these are driven by certain festivals. So in Jaintia Hills, for example, the duration of the year where hunting intensity is maximum is during Christmas, because that's when they socialize, they throw big feasts at village level, and in the cities like Shillong, in Jowai, they have this large gatherings, friends gather, families gather, and there they like to have wild meat. That's one of the, I would say, prized items. So so there it's not really economic. Maybe it's economic for the people who hunt because they are getting money, but most of the time, like you correctly pointed out, the ultimate driver might be cultural preferences, cultural taste, or demands of certain cultural festivals. So this Arunachal example that I was giving, so in Siang Valley, it's called Aran Festival. And if you stop people from hunting during Aran, even governments are not able to do, forest departments are not able to do. They know there will be social problems. There will be big time social turmoil, which they can't risk. So if you get into the shoes of the political parties or our say our political masters and all, if I can use that term, for them the votes are more important than the animals. That's an unfortunate fact, because for them holding on to the power means that they have to have the confidence and the support of the community. So I completely agree with you that culture plays an important role, but it might not be very correct to say that there are no economic consideration behind hunting at all. There are economic drivers of hunting, but culture also is equally important for hunting.
Thank you, Rajkamal. So this opens up two more points in my mind. You mentioned about weapons. So I noticed an interesting difference between your landscape, largely Northeast India, and Central India and the Eastern Ghats. Probably because of the history of armed conflict and insurgency in these regions, guns were seized a long time back. So very rarely do you find. In fact, I have never seen anybody with a gun hunting with a gun in the Eastern Ghats and or Central India. I've got one or two images on my camera traps, but that's it. Largely, you see hunting mostly being done with bows and arrows, small weapons. Also, traps and snares are very widely used, but it's mostly bows and arrows. And dogs play a very, very important role. Dogs play a very important role. In fact, every time you see people hunting, you see them inevitably being accompanied by dogs, whether it's in the daytime or nighttime. So that's an interesting point I observed. And also, I wanted to continue this discussion on the socioeconomic drivers of hunting, because then it relates to wildlife trade as well. So I wanted to get a sense from you. What is the prevalence of wildlife trade in the Northeast region that you observed? What proportion of the animals that are hunted do you think are entering the trade market?
So trade can happen at multiple scales. So one is the local trade, which is happening at village level, or in that market which covers about 5 to 6 villages. So most of the pictures that I show are from such local markets. They are not really, say, markets in a mainstream town like Shillong, which caters to probably the whole of Meghalaya and some parts of Assam also. And then there are trade which is happening at cross-country level also, the international trade, part of the international trade record. So this is something that I was not really interested in, the international trade part, until I met you and we started talking about pangolins and started seeing the really huge scale of the problem that can become really, really important drivers of hunting. So when I was working there, what I observed was most of the trade was happening at local scale, except for two particular animals that were hunted for trade. When you talk to when you talk to the people there, they clearly say that pangolin was one of them and toke gecko was another. It's a wild lizard. So that had also huge demand in the international trade market. And they also told me one very interesting thing, that how these trade markets are very volatile. That about 20 years back, so around the early 2000s and all, there was a lot of demand for crab-eating mongoose. But that demand has diminished over the last 20 years. And now if you look at our camera trap data, crab-eating mongoose has bounced back. So they told there was a time when they never used to see crab-eating mongoose. So after the trade pressure went down, they bounced back, and that is one species which you'll commonly encounter, like direct encounters when you are walking in the forest. So that is another point I would like to make, is that if you have reserves or population reserves of the species which are hunted, And if you can maintain habitat contiguity, you can tackle this problem. So once you tackle the problem, there is the animals easily recover. And this we have seen in Manas, like tigers recovering in Manas. And I have observed this based on what people told me in Dental Health also.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point. In the Eastern Ghats and parts of Central India, I have seen that carnivores are not really widely targeted. It's mostly herbivores only, and in many instances also primates. Langurs I've seen being hunted, macaques. Um, but I've seen that carnivores don't really seem to be preferred that much. So there seems to be quite a bit of spatial variation also in terms of what species are preferred. And also, it's very interesting. You mentioned birds being hunted widely in the Northeast. Birds are hunted in the Eastern Ghats and Central India also, but there doesn't seem to be a strong preference for birds, as there is with mammals. So most hunting is mammals. Birds are shot, but not very widely. Probably that also relates to the weapon being used, because guns are not very available widely in the Eastern Ghats. Probably it's not so easy to hunt birds as it is to hunt mammals. And I also wanted.
No,
Sorry,
go
please
ahead. Go ahead. You finish your thoughts then.
So I also wanted to mention about the pangolin, the scale of pangolin hunting. So like you see in the Northeast, pangolins are also widely preferred species for hunting in the Eastern Ghats. But what people have mentioned many times is that pangolins are one such species which has completely gone down, and people themselves have attributed the reason to be hunting. And when you think about it, it makes sense, because pangolins don't really have a habitat preference as such. I mean, they are available, they are present in forests, they can be there outside forests. People have seen them near villages. They cross roads quite frequently. So they're not really habitat specific, as are several other species. And therefore, people have said that, the biggest possible driver for pangolin population declines is only hunting. This we have seen in the Eastern Ghats also. And also what we have seen is that people have become aware that there's a very large demand for pangolin parts and pangolin body parts and products in the illegal wildlife trade market. And they've realized that, and that many of the pangolins that are being hunted now, people prefer to keep them alive and then sell them in the wildlife trade market, which was not the case earlier. Even though it was also preferred earlier, but it was mostly for local consumption.
So I want to ask one question here to you, Vikram, because that's something I think we haven't really touched upon.
Yeah.
Is we know that from the 90s onward, we have seen a huge boom in the IT, the tech, development of tech and internet and IT-based like tools and equipments and all. And this has really proliferated across like the country. There are no remote regions today when it comes to being able to communicate with mobile or having access to internet. It has also become highly democratized. So what do you think the IT, the kind of role that IT has driven in terms of facilitating hunting or even controlling hunting?
Absolutely. The availability of good internet networks, even remote areas. I mean, there are most parts of the Eastern Ghats and Central India, you have very good network now. You get 4G everywhere actually. So this is, I'm sure it has facilitated wildlife trade to a great deal, because what I've seen is that so this has facilitated trade across a much larger area. Probably before 2 decades or 3 decades, most of the hunting and also the consumption of wildlife and wildlife meat used to happen locally. But now a lot of the hunting, even though it happens in the region, the trade is at a much larger scale, because everything happens on WhatsApp. They take photos of the animal that they've hunted, they record the whole process, they record the weight, the body length, all these parameters, and then they send it. They also send the quote on WhatsApp. So all the communication happens on WhatsApp, and then only the final sale is what happens physically. So this has no doubt facilitated the process much more. It has made it much more easier for people to find sellers and buyers as well. So no doubt, it's definitely a big contributor.
Yeah, and like I told, in many cases, many of these images were shared on WhatsApp with me.
Correct,
And
correct.
like when we started doing the work, when internet was not so prevalent, couldn't even imagine.
Absolutely.
And the other thing which it has really facilitated is the communication. And like you mentioned, how if there is a demand in say some country, it reaches that information reaches very fast. So within matter of
Absolutely.
few hours, they'll get that information. Um, and I mean, although we hope that it will, our sincere hope is that IT will improve our life. It has definitely made life very miserable for the animals, particularly those which have demand in trade. And another thing I wanted to ask you, Vikram, because you have been
So,
working in.
I saw a couple of audience questions. Can we take the audience questions now?
Yes, yes, I think this is a good time to take.
Yeah, so there was a question about the role of superstitions in fueling hunting. What role do you think superstitions? So, for example, we have seen in the Eastern Ghats that people believe that pangolin scales can cure a vast variety of diseases. Are there also such superstitions prevalent about the purported role, the role that wildlife products can play in curing certain diseases or things like this in the Northeast?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure if I can call them quote unquote superstition in the sense of securing disease. Some might work also because, I mean, for example, there is a tradition in Jaintia Hills for people to feed the blood of uh, hula gibbon to pregnant women, believing that the child will grow up very, very healthy. So there are certain practices. I'm not sure if they work or not, uh, but definitely they do facilitate or they push for hunting certain species. Bile, the bile stones of bears are also highly preferred for many of the traditional medicine practitioners. And then there are certain kind of meat. So, for example, the meat of brush-tailed porcupine is considered to be aphrodisiac. And then there are many other meats like that of certain wild species, which they feel they become very powerful and strong if they eat that. But I think another interesting aspect of this is superstition can also play a role in certain animals not being hunted. So, for example, I mean, taboos and superstitions to be more like encompassing. So, there are certain species such as um, the what is that nocturnal primate species like the lorises and all. So, lorises are not hunted in Jaintia Hills. That's one species that they feel that the eyes and the face, no, it's like it resembles human beings because both the eyes face frontwards, no, and they usually will avoid hunting owls also for the same.
Right. So I also wanted to ask you about the links with zoonosis and emerging diseases. So zoonosis, just for the audience's knowledge, are diseases which can spread from wild animals to humans. The most widely known example of this is, of course, COVID, as we all know. And Rajkamal, I wanted to ask you in the context of COVID, and there have been several other zoonoses that we know. The SARS outbreak that happened in China and Hong Kong in 2003 and 2010, I believe, was reported to have originated from bats and then spread into humans through civets. Ebola, we all know, is a very famous example of how even though the reservoir, the actual host of the Ebola causing virus is not yet identified, it's widely believed to be bats. And then because of hunting of primates and chimpanzees and gorillas, so this which act as reservoirs for the Ebola virus, the virus can break out, spill over into human beings. So has there been an increased awareness of the role that hunting can play in and in facilitating the spread of zoonosis, so infectious diseases that can leap over from wildlife to humans? Has there been an awareness of this in among the population at large or in the landscape that you work with since COVID happened?
No, not at all. No. I think people think between COVID and hunting specifically. In fact, after talking to people, what I realized was hunting had increased during the COVID, and even in post-COVID, still forest department started patrolling very intensively and all. There was a spurt in hunting. And another important thing is I didn't see much initiative from the forest department also to link the hunting or the trade of the hunted animals with this kind of zoonotic occurrence. Like you told, COVID could have been a very good opportunity to make people aware about the big risks that hunting can have for our society.
Absolutely.
And
I believe that. Sorry, please go on.
Yeah, Vikram, just a connected question. So I shared with you recently, like the forest department had shared this lots of images of one big contingent of wildlife that they confiscated, and that those were all Southeast Asian species, if you remember, right?
Right,
so
right, correct.
Another important thing I would like to mention, maybe more than local hunting, the other risk is this trade of like the exotic animals, which is happening in the country, and there is a huge risk there for diseases, for the zoonotic diseases, spillovers, and I was stunned by the species that we got in that confiscated lot at that time, particularly. Like you have helmeted hornbills, and you have those tree kangaroos. I mean,
Absolutely.
I should have shown those pictures actually, but Vikram, I would want you to this whole mafia that exists in the country and how it operates, this whole exotic animal market. I mean, who are keeping these animals and how it is blatantly being transported over roads. So these contingents, like this particular like confiscation happened when the animals were being transported in a sumo, and apparently that sumo was coming from Mizoram. So it had already traveled at least about 1,000 kilometers within the country before it got caught in July, and that also was primarily because it was Independence Day and routine checkup was going on.
Absolutely, yeah. We are seeing more of these cases of people keeping these exotic animals as pets, as particularly rich people in cities, I would say. There was a case recently in Hyderabad where a man kept a lot of African species as pets. And the problem here is, I feel the Wildlife Protection Act is ambiguous on these species which come from other countries. So this person was saying that he has not violated any laws. But I mean, if you look at it, actually in the Wildlife Protection Act, none of these species are mentioned in our schedules. But I'm glad that the act is being modified, is being amended now. And a lot of the species which are protected under international conventions like the CITES Convention, I think they'll also find mention in the Indian Wildlife Protection Act.
It is there in the new list actually.
Okay. Oh, that's great. I think that will prevent a lot of these private zoos from bringing in exotic animals as pets and then further endangering their existence. I also feel that COVID was a very big missed opportunity. And like you said, I also noticed that in the Eastern Ghats and other parts of peninsular India, hunting in fact spiked by about 3 times during this period, particularly during the first period of the lockdowns. And we do not know what happened subsequently, but there seems to be no awareness, no widespread awareness at least of the role that hunting and more than hunting, illegal wildlife trade, where a lot of species are kept together and traded illegally. What role this can have in facilitating the spread of novel zoonotic infections from animals to human beings. And I believe this was a very big missed opportunity that it happened. So Rajkamal, I'll take one question from the audience now.
Please.
So there's a question from Irfan. He's asking, can you please ask if people have stopped reduced hunting during particular seasons because of diseases? As in, they must have seen that other people are getting sick after consuming meat or after going for a hunt. So has there been any reduction in hunting during particular seasons, particularly because of diseases?
I haven't come across such instances during my work with hunting in the Northeast. Vikram, you might have observed something like this, but I can't recall anything like that, any kind of information that I got like that.
Yeah, so Irfan, I've also not seen people reducing hunting, particularly because of diseases. I've seen people hunt more during particular seasons. So, and especially during festivals. In January, when Sankranti, the harvest festival happens, hunting spikes a lot. Also, May, June, during the first planting after the first rains, then also hunting spikes a lot. And I've seen that generally in winter, hunting happens more than in other seasons. Because in late winter, people have already harvested their crops and they are more free during that time. So that is the time when they have more free time, and they also prefer to hunt because it's cooler then. But I have not seen the reverse happening. I've not seen people hunting less in particular seasons because of diseases as such.
So I think we have answered Krishnamurthy's question. She says that hello sir, it was very insightful session. I wanted to ask, have you seen difference in hunting and trading of species during pandemic and post-pandemic in Northeast? So just to add one point, is there was a clear spike in hunting, and in fact on social media and even in news portals, there were many videos being circulated where people are actually justifying the lockdown as a reason of why they were going and hunting. And I had seen such videos and photos being circulated directly to me by the hunters. And it was really sad to see in one particular case where they had hunted about 15-20 huge sunbursts. And I think that is a common practice, but definitely I feel based on whatever I've heard and seen, and also after talking to a lot of people, that there was a clear spike during the pandemic, particularly during the lockdown, because there was a complete cessation of all kind of law and enforcement activities. And the second thing what we clearly saw is post-lockdown, the intensity might not have come down to pre-COVID level. What do you think, Vikram?
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if it would have come down to pre-COVID levels, but during the first phase of the lockdown, definitely hunting spiked by several times, and that was facilitated by a whole range of factors. One thing is that the people came back to their villages from towns.
Yes.
The lockdown itself,
the reverse migration which happened.
Exactly. During the lockdown, people were prevented, at least in forest areas, people were prevented from going to other villages, but that didn't stop them from going to the forests. They were free to go into the forests and engage in their daily livelihood activities. So that was a time when, and there was nothing else to do basically. That was one, and then many people who had jobs, small jobs, they also lost their jobs, and then this left people with a lot of options, I would say. And probably this was the biggest driver of the spike in hunting during the first year of the lockdown.
Yeah, and Vikram, another interesting thing was that that the study that we are doing, no? Yes. And you have seen some of the interviews. So many of the people had come back, it's like a holiday after the lockdown. They started working from home, right?
Yes.
So many people told me that they used to go out for hunting. Like it was a good opportunity for them to connect with the forest and go for collecting a lot of wild edibles. So there was a clear spike in general on the dependence on bioresources during COVID, because there was limited supply of vegetables in particularly the remote parts of the country. And like in Northeast, the villages are some sort of a republic in itself. So it can implement a lot of like restrictions in travel and also. They were not allowing any vehicles to come from Assam to their states. Like I'm talking about Nagaland, Meghalaya, and Mizoram. So in those cases, in Manipur also actually. So in those cases, what some of my students and some of my friends in Northeast told that they were mostly going out in the forest and they were having fun basically. That's what they told, that we are really enjoying the lockdown.
Yes, yeah. We have a question from Rakesh Basnet. I believe he is a wildlife researcher also. His question is, what will be our researchers' first reaction towards this type of encounter, even if they threaten to kill? So he's asking, how does a researcher who observes hunting going on in front of them react to what is happening? He has sent a photo of a pangolin, a hunted pangolin also.
Very interesting question. Vikram, you would like to take a first shot at this?
So the instances that I've not seen a pangolin being hunted myself directly, Rakesh, but I've seen several other species being hunted. And, of course you are shocked, but you can't really do anything. And I do not know if it's our place to do anything as well at that time. I think stopping hunting or preventing wildlife trade is a behavior change, and it requires long-term work in the landscape. And you need to address a lot of factors, because like we discussed, there are cultural factors, there are economic factors to hunting. And stopping one instance of hunting from happening by reacting aggressively or trying to stop or threatening them may not really work. In fact, it may be counterproductive, because then in retaliation they may hunt more. So I think our first reaction should be calm, and then try to observe, try to get information from them. Where did they hunt the species? What methods they've used? How frequently do they hunt? I think that would be much more valuable information. And although you may be shocked, but you can't really stop hunting in that particular instance. And what do you think, Rajkamal?
No, I agree. And Rakesh, it's a very good question, I would say, because it allows us to reflect also. And I'm not sure if you have read Amitav Aviskar's book, In the Belly of the River. So what Amitav Aviskar was going through, basically she, in that book, in one part, she's trying to see herself as a spectator of the different kind of hardship that people were going as the Narmada dams were being operationalized. So so her work was basically trying to understand the activism around the Narmada dam and how it affected people, particularly in the downstream, once they opened the canals and all. So what she struggled to do was to distance herself from the activism and empathizing with the people, because that's what researchers are not supposed to do. They are supposed to take a very objective view of things in some sense. So in some sense, you have to maintain a distance also. And in when we do studies like hunting, it's a very, very sensitive issue, because hunting is an illegal activity. Most of them know about that. They are trusting you with that information. So you have to build a lot of trust for people when they start sharing this kind of information. And particularly, I am not from Meghalaya. I had to go and spend a lot of time in that landscape to make those kind of them trust me. So that you should never betray that trust. One. Second thing is, like I told in the beginning, inherently I am interested in controlling hunting. So I also face that dilemma when I see people hunt, and there is that inherent desire in me to tell them, no, don't hunt. I have done that when I was walking with people and they wanted to shoot down a bird, and I've prevented them from doing. But in cases where they have already hunted, I try to keep my feelings within me. I don't share it with the person. And there are two reasons for that. One is that I don't want to lose their trust, and maybe it's a selfish reason, but I'm not being dishonest with them entirely. I'm just not sharing certain feelings with them. because as a researcher, I also have to understand that I have to collect data, and that's data for me. And if I share my feelings openly with them, or if I end up sharing my moral position, my moral and ethical position, that you shouldn't hunt, you shouldn't eat wild animals, it might endanger that whole study that I'm trying to do there. So maybe there is some kind of hypocrisy. I'm not sure how to deal with that, but that's a sad reality. But wherever I have not been collecting data on hunting, and I saw, like recently it happened during my Siang expedition, which I'm doing with a lot of other excellent wildlife researchers in ATREE. So in the Siang Valley, we are looking at host of different taxa, trying to understand the change in the valley. So there, one of the local villager, I was walking with him. I was looking at birds, and he saw one bird, and he just took his gun to hunt, and I prevented him from hunting, because at that point in time I was not really looking to collect any data on hunting. So whenever I don't have that conflict or that dilemma of that it might affect my study, I have always tried to prevent hunting. But when I was collecting data for my own PhD, I decided not to take it forward. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Mohammed.
Yeah.
But it's a very difficult question to answer, to be honest.
Absolutely. Yeah, Rakesh, it's a very big moral dilemma for us. And because hunting can be a very, very sensitive topic to deal with, like Rajkamal said. And this is the moral dilemma that we all have to deal with in our own way, actually. We have to take our own stand on it. And there is no correct or no wrong here. I think with experience, you get to understand what is the best position for you to take, I feel.
Yeah.
So Rajkamal, there's a question from Mehtab Singh. He says, I'm not a wildlife researcher. All my knowledge is gained through online articles. How can I contribute on an individual level for wildlife conservation? He also talks about there have been a few sloth bears left in Ghatigaon Wildlife Sanctuary near Gwalior. They are getting decreased every day due to human intervention into forests, hunting, and habitat loss. How can I spread awareness and collaborate with the forest department for conserving these last few sloth bears?
I think you are the right person to answer that, Vikram, because you are also working very close to that landscape.
I think so, Mr. Mehtab. One thing is, so if you want to work directly with animals, so there are two things here. If you want to do research on wildlife or on hunting, then it's a different process. Then you need to read papers, understand what they have done, and understand the landscape. Identify what population, what people you want to engage with in your research, and then have your questions ready, and then you do that as a research project, and anybody can do that. You do not have to have a background in wildlife or an academic background that is relevant, nothing like that. Just your interest is enough. You need to just read and understand the wildlife and the conservation issue more, and you can start doing that, and your experience itself will inform you. Whereas if you want to collaborate and engage with people who are already working in wildlife and with forest department, then you're free to do that. You can identify people, organizations in your landscape who are working to save these sloth bears. Forest department is mostly very open to having volunteers with them, because in most forest departments are severely understaffed, and usually they are open to volunteers coming and helping them with their tasks. I have seen that. So you can visit the nearest range officer or the divisional forest officer who is in charge of Ghatigaon Wildlife Sanctuary, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to have you on board. You can help in whatever capacity. You can maybe visit some villages and spread awareness. Or you can, I'm sure they'll be happy to have you. They'll be able to give you more details.
Yeah. I think I completely agree with you, Vikram. I think going and talking to the forest department is the right way, because it's a protected area. There is one question here from Raj Mulage. He says, it's a direct message to me, probably that's why you are not able to see. Okay. So he says, thank you for the wonderful presentation. Thanks, Vasavaraj. My question is to both the speakers. He asks, how do we go about preventing the hunting, poaching of a rare species, such as the Indian pangolin, in a place where there is little or no protection? And also, due to their rarity and low quantity, hunting sometimes these incidents will go unnoticed or ignored. So Vikram, you go first, and then if I might have to add any points, I'll add.
So, Mr. Baswaraj, I would say that the first thing here is identify the factors for hunting and poaching of pangolins in your landscape. Generally, it's for meat, and in areas where there is also a trade angle, then people hunt it to. In that case, they may keep it alive and they may try to sell it for money. So you identify which is the biggest factor for hunting in your landscape. Is it mostly for local consumption, or is there also a trade angle? People also hunt to largely to sell the wildlife that they hunt. And then I would say that if you want to try and address this issue, you need to spend a lot of time in the landscape and engage with people and inform them about the rarity of the pangolins. I've seen that in many cases, people know that pangolins are decreasing in numbers in their area, but they do not know that it's it's very, very rare everywhere. I've seen that people do not have this. Of course, they wouldn't know how many pangolins are there in other parts of the country. So you can inform them about this, that they are declining very rapidly across the country, and then you can also talk to them about the risk of infectious diseases. This also people do not know, because this is all emerging scientific knowledge. We ourselves have learned about this recently. So this will be definitely useful for people to know, and you'll also be doing them a service by telling them about this. This will help reduce the public health risk of emerging zoonosis like COVID. And thirdly, you can also talk to them about the myths that communities have. That I've seen that in the Eastern Ghats, people believe that pangolin scales can cure piles, and that they can protect people against black magic. So you can also deal with these. You can also talk to them about these issues, and this may result in a behavior change. So mitigating hunting requires behavior change, is what I've seen. And without this, they won't be much of an impact. And that is what we are also working towards in the Eastern Ghats. We are trying to conduct workshops at a grassroots level in different villages on talking about some of these issues. Yeah. Rajkamal, anything to add?
Are there more questions? Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I also have slightly different take on it, in the sense that when it comes to really rare, like, okay, this is the last. I mean, this is something that has to be protected. If we can agree upon that, that pangolin needs to be protected. We need pangolins in this world. If they go extinct, we are going to lose something very valuable. And I really believe that, because they are one of the kind species, very archaic species, very old species in terms of evolution. The scaly anteaters, right? That's where they belong to. These are very primitive animals, and they deserve to live in this world. I think we, as humans, should be considerate enough to allow them to survive in this world. So I really don't want them to go extinct, and I think because they are on the brink now, that where you don't take very strict measures, you can't. We are going to lose it. So in such cases, like the framework that I had shared earlier, so you have to really increase the barriers to hunting. So you have to really enforce the laws very strictly. And secondly, you have to really bring in very strong penalties. If you find anyone hunting pangolins or do anything with pangolins, you have to set really strict examples that no, you shouldn't be hunting these animals anymore. And also around the area where pangolins occur and you want to protect them, you remove all the enablers. And here, one of the main enablers is to allow people access to the forest, because they won't need guns. They can just set up traps, or if they see a pangolin, they can just carry it in and bring it along with them in their bag. So you have to also stop access to this forest. I feel these are some of the extreme measures which are required in such desperate situations like the case of pangolins that we are seeing. Sorry if I'm being too extreme, but sometimes if you want to make change, you have to take certain extreme steps.
So Rajkamal, we'll take the last few questions. Swapna Devar is asking, it was a wonderful talk and discussion. I have a question in mind. How does literacy rate affect the hunting awareness activities? Do you think that only creating awareness can slow down the hunting activity?
Yeah, can I answer that, Vikram? Because I have
please.
Yeah, thanks, Swapna, for your appreciation. Do keep in touch, assuming that you are interested in this topic. So it's a very useful question to ask. And I think this is also a good time to see the larger picture. So if you think that why is hunting important to tackle? Because it leads to decrease in the abundance of animals. It leads to extinction of animals. It leads to local extinction of animals. And we want to prevent that by stopping hunting. But another question to ask at the same time is it only hunting that is leading to local extinction of animals or decrease in abundance of animals or decrease in their distribution in the landscape? No, right? There are a lot of other issues going on right now. Like, for example, we take this moral position, which is important, which is not important. And we are all educated here in this, at least in this forum. Most of us have basic literacy today in this country. Even if you go to the remotest part, they have schools, people go to school. Going to school is pushed by parents these days, instead of just letting them sit at home. So literacy level is there, understanding is there. But I don't think literacy alone helps. If that was the case, then I am literate enough to know, for example, that when I was buying a house in Bangalore, and that house is in an apartment which was built over about 2 hectares of land, and that land was cleared. There used to be nice coconut plantation and lot of, I would say, semi-wild areas where a lot of species used to thrive. I have destroyed that habitat basically, and in the city, even such small habitats are really, really critical. So my actions have also contributed to local extinction of species. Now, did my education stop me from taking up that step? That no, I won't buy a house because I don't want to. I don't want my actions to lead to extinction of species. So I don't think literacy really helps. You make choices in life, you make hard choices in life. And I really don't have an answer also. If you ask me that, okay, then what should we do to change the outlook of people? So I'll just share one more example, what I've seen. And this is also some changes which are happening without us doing anything. So in Siang Valley, what I'm seeing increasingly, and when I've spoken to the elderly people there, what I'm realizing is most of the young people, there is a huge change in their lifestyle. So when I talk to the older generation, they always complain that the younger generation are not interested to go to the forest, to help them in cultivation of land. They are only interested in spending time with the mobile. And that really connected with me, because that's something my parents also always used to complain, particularly when the mobiles first came, and I started spending a lot of time with my mobile. And their main grouse was that I was not studying enough. I'm seeing same changes happening even in remote villages in Siang Valley. Siang Valley is the set of 4 or 5 districts in Arunachal, in eastern Arunachal, through where Siang River flows. The Siang River is nothing but what becomes Brahmaputra in Assam. So I think these kind of social changes which are happening now because of the IT boom. We spoke about how IT boom can actually facilitate hunting, but parallelly another kind of change lifestyle of people are also changing. The aspirations of young people are changing. They are looking for that opportunity to escape to town. And when they go to town, they don't have much opportunity to hunt. So one of the enablers that I was talking about, presence of animals around you, knowledge will disappear. So there will be a decline in the number of people who will be hunting. But let's not assume that it will stop hunting, because the same people, if they have money, they will basically outsource. Like I told, they might outsource hunting now. So if I am in the village, I remember eating animals which my dad used to hunt. As I grow older, I have money now. I don't know how to go and hunt, but I can always pay someone the money to bring me wild meat. So as long as we have access in the forest, people have knowledge, hunting will continue. But I am seeing a change in the ground that with certain social, economic changes which are happening, large scale changes, that will lead to decrease in the number of people who are skilled in hunting.
Rajkamal, sorry, I was muted. So there's a question from Dharmik. Wildlife conflict cases are being seen, and then the animal is being kept under captivity. Is it necessary to do so? I think, Rajkamal, can you hear me? Okay, I think Rajkamal is muted. So I'll give you my take on this, Dharmik. I mean, although this is not exactly related to hunting, in some cases, for a brief period of time, the animals are kept under confinement. Particularly, you may be talking about elephants and leopards in this case. I mean, this is very unfortunate, but so there's always demands on the land, and when elephants raid farms and fields, although these were previously forests only, this creates conflict, and in many cases, this could lead to the death of the animal. So for a brief period of time, they are kept under confinement, and if the animal is able to be rehabilitated, then they are released in forest areas. I can see the pressure on the forest department also, because the forest department is under pressure from several different quarters, from people, from politicians, from wildlife researchers, from NGOs. So for a brief period of time, they are kept under confinement, and then they are later released. But if they're not able to be rehabilitated, then they continue to remain in confinement. And we have seen this in many cases, particularly in the case of elephants. There are several different elephant camps throughout the Western Ghats, where conflict animals are brought and kept in these camps. And some will be released eventually in forest areas, but several other elephants will continue to remain in confinement in these camps throughout their life. This is a sad reality. Rajkamal, this is the last question from Deepa Padmanabhan. She's asking, how is hunting different from poaching?
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yeah, you're audible.
I'm really
Rajkamal.
sorry, I don't know what's wrong. Yeah, I think there is a very clear difference. Technically, when we talk about poaching, we mainly mean that it's done for certain species which have very high international trade value. Whereas hunting refers to all other kind of activities which might be for food, hunting for pet, but usually implies that at very local scale, offtake or removal of animals by either capturing them or killing them usually refers to hunting. Wild meat refers to any animal, like I told, a non-aquatic terrestrial animal which is hunted for food. So these are some very technical differences, but yeah, poaching requires hunting in some sense. So to poach an animal, you should know how to hunt that animal. But these are very technical differences.
Yes. So Rajkamal, should we wind up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have your words, I think, to say that, and I think I'll also thank.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today on this Friday morning for this webinar, and thank you very much, Rajkamal, for sharing your vast experience during your PhD and subsequently over the years that you've been doing your work on hunting and wildlife trade. I'm sure it's been very insightful for all the participants, and I hope everybody has enjoyed today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I would also like to thank CWS Vikram for allowing me this opportunity to share my thoughts, part of my research on hunting, and all of you who sat through patiently despite the technical glitches, and particularly for the wonderful questions, very insightful questions. I also learned a lot, and few questions led us to think about very difficult problem that we are trying to tackle. And I'm sure many of you are working on hunting, interested in hunting. That's why you are attending this. So I would urge you to keep in touch, keep sharing your thoughts, and figure out ways to also keep interacting in the future. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Yes, thank you to everybody who has joined us today. Thank you, and please do keep in touch with us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vikram. Thanks, everyone. Bye.